Hey guys, welcome back to Thriving in Love podcast, the podcast that challenges the status quo so couples can thrive as their most authentic selves. I'm your host, Sana, and I have a very special guest here today, Casey Stevens, a psychotherapist helping humans restructure unproductive patterns to make radical transformation through conscious awakening. Casey, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to dive into your world today. How did you get started in the work that you do? What were you doing before? And what led you to your spiritual awakening?
So all of those kind of came together at the same time for me. And the impetus really was, honestly, my life kind of falling apart, a marriage, a relationship, not working, which was the last thing on earth that I would have ever expected. I had been in a 12-year relationship and married, and that just kind of like turned on its head after a couple of years of really kind of struggling and trying to find resolution through all of that. And when it became clear that it wasn't going to, I had to really kind of reinvent and look inward to really identify who I was and what I was meant to do in this world. And so it was really, truly like an identity crisis and rebirthing into something else. But to say that it was everything in my life kind of peeled away and I had to reevaluate truly everything, my career included, because before I worked kind of in interior design and buying, and I love the creativity and the beauty of all of that and still fascinated with all of that work. And it wasn't really my purpose. I loved it, but I realized that I was really meant for so much more. And so really how it all started was just me kind of going inward and starting my own healing journey inward during that time that was, pretty destructive in my life, and having to reinvent everything, because also starting a relationship so young and getting married so young, so much of my identity and coming into my, kind of formative adult years had all been coupled and shared with this other person that no longer was part of my life. And so I had to truly recalculate darn close to everything in order to really kind of reemerge in the world as my individuated self. And I hadn't taken the time ever to truly do that because I had been in this relationship so young. So that
I relate to that.
Yeah, do you?
So deeply. How old were you when you got married, if you don't mind
I
me
was
asking?
22 when I got married, right
Yeah, that's
after
so young.
graduating college. Yeah. So, which
Yeah.
honestly I hadn't necessarily planned on doing, but I can see kind of
Same.
developmentally how unconsciously we end up, mirroring patterns from our own family of origin. My parents got married and still are married and actually have a beautiful, happy marriage. But they got married really young. And so we just kind of unconsciously absorb all of that. And here, I had been with my husband at the time for 5 years, and it just seemed like the natural progression. I wasn't like really like, oh, I need to get married at 22, but it, is ironic.
I mean, it's 5 years you're together, so why not take that next
Yeah,
step? It makes sense.
he proposed, and I thought, oh, okay, yeah, why not? Like, it does seem like the natural progression of things.
Yeah.
And so I got married at 22, and then kind of when all of this was falling apart was in my late 20s.
Wow. Do you feel like it was because of your Saturn return at
Oh,
all?
like all of that was happening.
Yeah.
Exactly during my Saturn. Like my
You
Saturn
were right on schedule for like a whole life
for the whole
shakeup.
Yeah, the whole shakeup. It absolutely, like the Saturn return hit me hard. There is no question about that. So, it was really
same.
during those years, like 28 to 30, that so much was happening. And really, I mean, as you obviously know, it's like if it's not aligned, like,
It's gotta go.
is going to tear it from you. And so that happened in the most dramatic of ways for me. But nonetheless, it was all perfect. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because it resonates so deeply with me and my story too. I was 25 when I got married, so a little older, but I lived with my parents. I wasn't allowed to live alone until I got married. And I saw marriage as kind of like a freedom card to like get out of the house and go live my life and get my life started. I want to talk about, why do you think women fall into that programming in marriage? Like, where does that come from? And how can we, I guess, give some nuggets of wisdom to women right now who may be getting married and are, or maybe avoiding marriage altogether because they're so scared of that narrative that women fall into the trap of like becoming these caregivers and caretakers and just like kind of losing ourselves in marriage.
Yeah, I think a huge part of it was for me, and sometimes this can be age related, but I wouldn't really encourage anyone to get married that young.
Me
You think
too.
you know yourself, you think you know yourself, but you really, most people don't. And so unless you've taken like a really conscious effort, and I was always kind of mature beyond my years. A lot of people maybe would have called me an old soul, and so I really was that, right? And in many ways I knew lots of things about myself, but I just hadn't ever taken the time to really like self-examine in a conscious, deep way. I mean, I hadn't ever really been to therapy until all of this was all coming apart. And so, whether it's therapy or coaching or whatever, I hadn't really done meaningful inner work until I was in a crisis, which is really how most people handle it. But it's so beautiful when you see people kind of coming in and wanting to do that work before. And so there is a correlation for sure. Not that, people can't get married young and have success at that. But I think it's more rare because we often haven't done the work. And so I think it's really about the work. And so have you taken time to develop as an individuated self and learn what your true values and your identity are before you merge with anybody? I mean, frankly, we'll be better partners if we do that. And so rather
Agreed.
than, which so is to everybody's benefit, not just to our own, right, but to our partners that we marry, it's so beneficial, right, to show up as a whole kind of conscious person rather than having not done that. And so, again, there seems to me that there is a bit of a correlation. Although I have beautiful souls that I work with, sometimes I'll catch people and like do work when they're teenagers, and I'm like, oh man, I wish I would have done what you
So
did.
lucky.
Yeah, you are so wise and so beyond your years when you really come in and do that work because they just know themselves. And so really I think
Yeah,
that's the ticket, right? Is taking the time to really figure out who the heck you are and have a deep, conscious, intimate relationship with yourself. And if you do that, then everything just clear, like the way is just cleared for you to really have a conscious relationship, because then anybody that's not that would not be a match for you, of course. Like they just wouldn't even come into your life. Or if they did, they would help reflect back to you patterns that still need to be healed in you that you haven't quite finished healing. And so it really is, I think it's the work. I think it's taking time to sit in a container with somebody, whatever that is, and dive in and really explore who the heck you are and what your values are and how you can, be devoted to yourself in this beautiful, intimate way. So that's what I would say.
totally.
What do you
Yeah,
think?
no, I agree with you 100%. It's so funny because I always tell my cousins, like, wait until you're 30 to get married, please. Because, like, I do believe that your 20s, I feel like, should be for you to, like, explore all of the different things that you want to do, get it, like, not all out of your system, but, like, just express yourself in all the different ways that you're curious about. Try on different identities and see what you like and what you don't like, and like explore, right? Like, I know for me, I never really knew like who I was even when I was younger. Like, being a middle child, I was always like, oh, whatever my siblings want is fine. I'm just like gonna go along with it. But like my 20s were so explorative for me, and thank God I had a husband who like was very supportive of me just like being whoever I wanted to become, and which is why we were able to like, so we got married young, but like when I went on my spiritual awakening journey, we ended up getting our own apartments while I did the deep inner work, and we hung out every weekend, but during the week I was just like healing deep stuff. And I'm so grateful to have a partner who like, was so open-minded to all of that. But what are your suggestions and recommendations for people who like may be married or in a relationship and wondering like, oh shoot, I don't think I did enough inner work before committing into this relationship? Like, where would you suggest for them to start?
Yeah, I mean, it's never too late to start anywhere. Just dive in. And
Yeah.
sometimes that can be really threatening because it sounds like, so you got married young and then you've been with your same husband, but you just kind of had the awakening while you were with him, which can be really hard, right? Because so beautiful that you had
Yeah.
that container that that could be facilitated right in the space of the marriage. But sometimes, there can be this fear that we're going to outgrow. It's like, if I do work on myself, is this going to be relevant for me? And a part of us knows that, whether it's conscious or subconscious. And so we will resist investing in ourselves because we don't want
Mm.
connection, right? So I think there is this kind of continuum that we come in to life just as souls, and we are authentic, right? And then which I've talked about many times, but it just kind of bears mentioning that what happens is just, even developmentally with our parents and our family systems, our families of origin, right? We have to adapt to their values and their ways of operating in order to connect. And so we lose a bit of ourself, and some of us lose a lot of ourselves, and some of us lose, little parts, right? But that isn't
Right.
as, unless we're consciously parenting, we're not really inclined to hold on and maintain that strong sense of self. So, and so we move more towards connection and away from authenticity. And then I think what the soul's journey is in this life really is moving back into our authentic self. And so in my mind, there is never too late to do that, right? And I'm no, you already know that, but it sounds like that's what your journey was, that you were allowed to explore. And sometimes it's not possible, right? Because if we really individuate to separate sometimes from our family systems, I was fortunate that I had a really beautiful family system, so I could
Yeah,
um,
I also had to detach from my family.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and in a way, right, there is just kind of this, I always call it like a tower experience, where you kind of go into your tower, and it's very, like that isolation and time to yourself is really, really important. And it sometimes will be too threatening to the relationships that we have, whether it's our friends or our family or our partners, if we have
Definitely. Yeah.
partners when we do it. And so to kind of go into your tower and isolate to really get to know who you are, which is a deeply intimate and individual experience. Sometimes that will be too threatening to some of those relationships. So certainly that was threatening to my marriage relationship. It was not threatening to my family relationship, although there was probably some distance or just space that I needed to take, and to some friendships and relationships, right? Because our knowing when we emerge into that tower is that some of these relationships may not be relevant anymore when we reemerge. So that is to choose yourself, to choose to be authentic, to choose to kind of come back home to yourself and the parts that we have forgotten. It's a really courageous move to make, because our life could look very different, and our connections and relationships may look very different on the other side of that. And so for sure, that was the case for me. And there's a grieving process, right? Because our impulse is to go backward and to reconnect and not to lose those connections. And of course, as you know, better than anyone here, right? It's possible to keep those connections, but it can be hard. And sometimes it's not possible. And
And you
so,
do have to go through a death and rebirth for sure. Like, you cannot bring with you the past version of a relationship that you had. So like, my husband and I actually had an entire grieving process of like this whole beautiful 6-year marriage that we built, that we were completely dismantling and letting go of, to create that space to allow for both of us to, one, have the space individually to become whoever we feel like wants to emerge from our being and our vessel, and then to choose each other again and give each other that full freedom to be like, hey, this is who I am now. Are you still attracted to me or not? Is this still working or not? Like, is this still
same,
something that,
right? Mhm.
yeah, like a full opportunity to be like, okay, either we go our separate ways and say, well, I'm so proud of you becoming whoever you wanted to be, and like send that love, right? Or be like, damn, I really like you even more now, and it's awesome and I love it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the opportunity, right? Because when you do this inner work to know yourself and to be whole, and if your partner can do that as well, what can come through that, right? Like what's available to you is so much more. And so I'm so happy for you that you were able to do that, because, really that's the ideal. It's like, can we make this work without
Yeah.
compromising ourselves, right? Without sacrificing or abandoning who it is that we know that we have become. And a lot of times, again, that's not possible. I work with a lot of couples. I love doing couples work.
Me
Um,
too.
Yeah. And, whether it's somebody who's been together for 40 years and they're just evaluating that now, or, people like you
Yeah.
and I who, had these kind of early, I mean, usually that's the case, right? They have found themselves in the space of a marriage. I'll even look around and see it with, friends and family, right? It's like, man, you found yourself in this space, but you haven't actually ever consciously done the work. And so that can be stifling for some people. And so to, again, have the courage to evaluate that at any point, it's never too late, because it's always possible, right, to walk through that and both do your work at the same time. Or when I have couples who have a real struggle that will come up between them, whatever it is, there could be an infidelity or just something that has driven them apart. But when they both consciously choose to come together and work on that, like, the opportunity is still available to them. That's so incredible to have something more meaningful on the other side of that, if they're both choosing to do the work at the same time. So how beautiful.
Yeah, I completely agree. And something that you said earlier about it being courageous just like really spoke to me, because it's like
Mhm.
so many people think that it's selfish to go and do that work when nothing's wrong in the relationship or it's not going crazy, and it's just kind of like, I know I felt it where I was like, man, why am I disrupting a beautiful marriage for what, right? Like, because I have this feeling of like wanting to be free, like I'm
Yeah.
so happy, I'm so comfortable, why am I disrupting something for no reason? But I do agree with you that I think it takes real courage to choose yourself and choose the callings of your heart, choose the calling that's coming from deep within, right? And honor that and respect it. And not what I used to do was just be like, you're crazy. That's not normal. Like, you're dreaming. You know what I mean? Like, we'll just like bypass our dreams because we think they're not realistic.
Right.
When, like, who decides what's realistic?
Yeah, well, hopefully we are consciously deciding, right? But I think that's the continuum, right? That we're kind of talking about, which is that you were asking. It's like, well, why don't we do that if we're still choosing connection over our authentic self? Then
Mm.
we're going to miss this opportunity that our soul really wants us to have. And so we will choose that, like, we have to choose it in our families of origin because there's just a way that we have to adapt in order to survive. But we do not have to choose that, right, in our partnership. And so that's where it's difficult, because now we're old enough to make a conscious choice and to know ourselves. And so oftentimes unconscious people will just keep, it's like, oh, well, I could do more, but well, why? I'm going to lose my connection if I do that, potentially, right, to my partner. And so it's so brave to say, man, I'm going to do this anyway so that I can both be my authentic self, which will ultimately deliver us to a far more intimate experience with our partners and with ourselves. But again, we have to kind of stretch that tether of connection and test it. And, there's no way around it other than to go
Mm.
through it and to do it.
I love that. Thank you so much. Love how you explain that tether, because that's exactly what it felt like expanding that space of like being able to hold two whole individuals in the container of one space versus half of ourselves. As
Right.
like the world loves to say, like your soulmate is like another half of your soul or whatever. And I'm just like, I don't think that resonates with me anymore. Like, I want to be a whole soul and I want to experience him in his like whole essence, you know?
So, yeah.
But yeah,
For you.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you. In your definition or in your own words, like, how would you define authentic love? Like, what does that look like now that you're engaged now? Like, what are you hoping to bring into this relationship?
Well, I think, everything that we've really been just saying is like that whole self is like me knowing exactly who I am and showing up that way authentically, which means I am first and foremost true to myself,
Hmm.
true to my own values, true to my own truth, right? Like that is, and it's not selfish, right? It is so self-honoring, which then becomes honoring of this other person, because this connection can be so much more real. You can actually, if I know myself, then I can give you the exposure, right? I can give you the opportunity to truly know me. And that's the version of you that I also want to know, right? The real you. I don't want something that you're pretending to be or that you're pleasing to me about. Like, I want to know all of it, good, bad, ugly, in between. Like, to me, that there is a grit in that kind of relationship that is so much more potent and valuable. To have that, I can show up and be my true self. I don't have to mask anything. I don't have to pretend. I can just, be the real me. And it's so liberating to live in that way where you can just truly, love who you are, right? Like that devotion is, again, first and foremost to who you are and being true to that. And then to experience yourself that way, offer that to somebody else and experience somebody else that way is a beautiful thing. And for me, that was a long process of figuring that out, to unwinding all of that, to really becoming that myself so that I could offer that, but also, finding a person who is also available on that same level. It's not a small thing. It's a pretty miraculous, beautiful thing. And it's what's available to us when we really devote ourselves to, the work.
I completely agree. Was there ever a time, like, how did that process go when you were dating and when I'm sure you went on like many dates or a few at least that, may not have felt aligned. How did you know that the person that you did decide to commit your life to now is like the right fit or like the right choice?
Well, for me, it was a long journey, right? Years after, my marriage fell apart, that was really like quite an identity crisis and a devastating experience for me because I didn't really see that. I was just so devoted to that in so many ways. And so, although I chose it, right, I was the one that ultimately chose it. Still, there is a grieving and a loss in all of that, and just kind of recalibrating and investing in myself. So there's a long time that I didn't date or wasn't really interested. I've had much single time in my life just because I've been so deep in the work. And then I've had, relationships. This is like, we're talking over a decade of time where this has kind of really played out, where I would, be single for a lot of it. I'd be just focusing on myself, focusing on my work, focusing on all of that. And then I'd have relationships. And then still I would kind of find myself in traps of not really, oh, well, why is this coming into my life? Or why is this showing up? And rather than that ever being about somebody else, it's really looking at, well, it's showing up because there's still something in me that is unavailable, that I need to heal or explore or understand. And so, every relationship that I had, not that I had, so many actual relationships, but they would just always reflect something that is like, oh, hey, here's what's still going on inside. Like, better look inward and figure that out. And then I would identify that and, be able to move on from those. And then, something else would emerge. And it's interesting. Yeah. That happened. And then there were times, right, that I was just dating and experimenting, and, just meeting lots and lots of people and doing that maybe in more rapid fire way. But ultimately, even that I could notice when I would go on, say, one date with somebody, I would notice right away, I would just get faster and faster and better. Like, well, why is this person consciously showing up in my life? Even if it's only for this one dinner date, or it's this one, drink, or whatever, the one walk, or whatever it ends up being. Why has this shown up in my life? And sometimes it's just, to really know, like, yeah, this is not for me, or, and not as an indictment or a judgment of anyone, but just really, it's always comes back to the self. And so how do we know ourselves more clearly and truly? And so I think I just got better and better. And sometimes I'd have shorter relationships where, again, just dating, maybe you'd be dating for a month or something, and there would be something really valuable or really beautiful, but it still wasn't quite right. And I guess I just, like, my discernment got better and better and better about all of that. And so, and if there was something that I needed to play out or work out in a bigger way, I could do it faster inside myself. Like, that was my own inner work that was just like really happening faster, even though, again, there are times, right, that it's like, oh,
always,
and not settling too. Another thing is, truly, actually, I've had beautiful relationships with lovely, lovely men. Things could be mostly right. Like, it's like, this is really good, and I could actually have a life with this person. But when it came down to it, what I realized is if it wasn't completely right, if it wasn't like super conscious, if it wasn't like totally clicking in, if there was anything that I was still like, yeah, I could have a really decent life with this person, like it would be good. Sometimes good can be the enemy of great, right? And so
Agreed.
we really had to, in some of those instances, and there were probably a few where it was like, man, everything is really good here. There's nothing to complain about. Great guy, but it just wasn't super conscious, so it wasn't right. And so those that can be the tricky ones too, right? Because to your point earlier, and I'm not that it's exactly the same, but it's like, man, why would I disrupt something that isn't like, there's nothing bad here really. And what I learned about myself is just like, I knew somewhere in my bones, my intuition, I knew that there was something more that was available, right? I didn't want to have just a good marriage. I wanted a great, especially everything that I had gone through to get to this point and
Yeah.
the work that I
No,
help people do.
I
It's
think
like,
every woman should feel this way. Like, yes, louder for everyone listening. It's so important. Like, we don't need marriage is something I say often on this podcast. And I do believe that if we are to choose one, it should be a conscious choice that we're choosing who we're choosing to be with. But more importantly, like they should be adding to your joy, to your peace, to your happiness, not, taking away from those things. So I agree with you. Like, I think not settling is the key to a happy, healthy, thriving relationship.
well, and it can get, confusing. I've worked with women, I've felt it myself, right?
Yeah.
And not just women, I've worked with men, I've worked with lots of people, right? Where it's like, there's nothing really terrible here, nothing bad, nothing like we have a good life, but it really can, like to choose that is to not choose something bigger or more
I think
available.
it takes a mindset though. Like as you're talking, I'm just thinking something that's popping up is you really need to have an abundance mindset, knowing that there is better available. And I think when I work with my clients, a lot of them have that fear of what if this is as good as it gets? Like, what if I'm just wasting time and I'm never going to find someone and I'm going to spend the next like X amount of years? And then we have like the whole biological clock come into play for women. So it's so scary. I see where they're coming from and I see where they're at. And like, I know to like the core of my being that like what you're saying, right? That abundance mindset. If
Yes.
it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no. Like it's just not worth it. There is nuance there too because my husband and I have transformed through the years and there's a lot of growth that can happen in the container of a relationship. But I think that there's some key elements like those core values, the lifestyle choices, the dreams and ambitions that we have for the future. Like if those things are not there on day one, I don't think you can work on that. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Well, totally. Yeah. And I think listening to that, right? Absolutely. It's an abundance. You are right on about that to have an abundance mindset. And it's really just, taking that leap again, if you can see, and again, I'm a healer and a therapist. And so the way I approach things is I know people can change. And that can be a loop we can get into too, is that I help people do this and I know they can. And so even if there is a little struggle or something, and it's like, well, I always believe in giving the opportunity to kind of repair that or see, like, is there more meat on the bone? Like, can we explore this together? Right. I don't think we should just, cut and fish, whatever bait that is that I'm trying to say. Right. It's like, we don't have to just cut people off right away if it's not perfect. But voicing what maybe your concerns or what your needs or what your desires are in a relationship and giving that person the opportunity to do that. I've gotten caught in that loop too, where it's like, okay, well, let's try. Can we make this better? Can we optimize? Can we heal this one part? Or if that's not, that can be a loop we can get caught in too, is just kind of a thought that I'm having about that. But it's also important not to keep giving way and seeing just the potential of something rather than, actually what the reality is, and trusting that if you're not experiencing that where you are, then you have to be willing to do the brave thing and really just set yourself free, right? And not, I call it ship jumping, right? Where it's like, well, I need to see evidence that that thing is there because I don't trust that it's going to come. And so I better hang on to this. And so, people will jump ship from one relationship to the other quickly. And it's like, man, if there's something that's not there, you just have to trust the free fall and not jump to some other place or need to have evidence that something is close. It's like, just let yourself float out there in the vast ocean. If there's healing that you need to do, or more clarity, or more trust, or more intimacy with yourself you need to develop so that you can be a match for that or attract somebody, whatever that is, then do that. Right. But that's really what I've had to confront that many times in some of these relationships along the way, because the truth is, and it's a bold move, right, to do, but the truth is you'll just be so much better off. Like when you find that person that is your match on every level, it's just easy. It's just, you're fortunate to be able to cultivate that within the space of your relationship, which is so incredible. And I admire so much when that can happen in a partnership. And sometimes you really just have to set yourself free so that you can actually go find that where you're meant to find it. And I'm so glad. I cannot tell you how grateful I am that I took that leap for myself, because when I found my partner, it was like so easy. It was like everything was aligned. All like he was already who he was, and this evolved beautiful whole man. And I was, and so we could just come together, and the flow of that was just so easy. And there was no question. And I think we knew right away that this was it for us. So yeah.
I got full body chills when you said that. Like, it's such confirmation that I agree. Like, I remember when I first met my husband, even though I wasn't like consciously awake and aware and this and that, it was just this like knowing that this person's going to play a massive role in my life in some way, shape, or form. It was like instantaneous. And at the time, like, we met through mutual friends, but like it took us years to like actually go on our first date. But then the minute that we had our first date, like a year after that, we were married, because it was just that like that excitement. Like, how long have you been dating your fiance?
A year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I agree. Like, it's just like when it's this connection that just can't be questioned. Like, it just is. And I think I say this all the time. I feel like he was my glitch in the matrix. Like, he was not like anyone else that I knew or met. He just like was the most interesting human being I've ever met. And I was just like mesmerized by like all of him,
I love that. Yeah, it is. And yet there will be elements, like for me, there are familiar elements of like, oh, I was trying to find this, or I really love this, or, and wow, you have it. Like, how incredible. And I'm so lucky, right, to like have the beautiful embodiment of all of these parts, right? These fragments that it's like you might have been looking for, you found here or there, whatever, but to have it so thoroughly embodied in this way that
one package. Yeah.
me exactly the way I like pinch myself. I just feel so fortunate to yeah, to be loved by this beautiful man. So
I agree. I love that. Thank you for sharing. If there's, somebody watching right now who wants to know how they can call in this person that is embodied in all of their desires, what are some tips or tricks or modalities that they can try to call that person in?
Well, I would just like focus on, I mean, for me, I think focusing on yourself and getting to know yourself first. So that would be the number one, again, wherever you are. And then I would like really look at whatever limitations there might be to relationships. Like, what barriers do you have to having a conscious relationship? What beliefs do you have that would be maybe blocking, that would be a lack mindset in some way? Like, really kind of examining that, because even if, and this was true for myself as well, like even if you know yourself, but there are still some, or there's a woundedness, because for me, that was a huge part of it. I had such fear about connecting, because really when I connected the first time, although I wasn't completely conscious, right, I thought it was such a sure thing. And so and then to lose that, and to really kind of lose that relationship in a way that felt like the rug was pulled out from under me. Like I was so sure of it. And it actually was a great relationship. I mean, it wasn't as conscious as I I mean, you're limited your consciousness, but it was like limited in some of these ways, right? That I didn't realize. And yet there was so much beauty actually in that. Like we had a lot of credential that was built up over 12 years of just, there's so much that was really good in my marriage. To feel like you lose that, there can be a fear that we develop. For me, and this is just one example, right? That people can evaluate. It's like, well, when we've been injured in this realm of love, then those injuries can block us from actually reconnecting, because our protective parts inside are really going to say, oh no, don't do that again. Or, oh, wow, your heart was so broken. Or, wow, you were really devastated. Let's not have you have that experience. And so it will block experiences from you because it thinks it's helping, right? These protective subconscious parts think they're helping, but they're not really helping. And so I would say work with somebody like you, or me, or anybody who does this in a way to help you identify what those blocks are that might prevent you. Like, even if you know yourself, there still might be barriers that are preventing you from actually connecting from that person. And so we'll continue to attract unavailable people, or on some level, the fears that we have, essentially, I mean, this is how I know that it works, but the fears that we have about that will end up drawing to us until we've consciously healed what those are, so that we're not attracting them in our lives and we're not having that reflection. And so I would say find somebody who can help you do that work, because oftentimes we might really think we want a relationship, but if we can't really see what our own limitations are, having somebody hold a container to reflect back to you what the limitations might be, so that you can work on them, release them, and move forward without having them blocking you anymore, is a really essential process. And again, we don't know what we don't know. So if you're not conscious, it's really wonderful to have somebody who can reflect that to you in a way to really say, yeah, I think this is what maybe is going on, and how can we work with it? So I would say then do that work, whatever you need to do to remove the barriers. And then really just noticing, like, how much of an abundance mindset do you have? Are you truly open and aligned with that? Or are you blocking from yourself experiences, or are you drawing negative experiences you don't want because you are not kind of in this more abundant, flow around all of
Frequency,
that? Yeah, totally.
I completely agree. I love what you said earlier too about being so consciously aware of seeing the kind of people that you're attracting into your reality. And instead of being outwards with that, you really went inwards. And I think that's the key to being consciously aware and like really put it into your brain that whatever you're experiencing in your external reality is a mirror into your connection with yourself.
Mhm.
And, I know I fall into this sometimes where I'm just like, gosh, why is this happening? Or why is that happening? And then like forgetting, right? That like, okay, what is this here to teach me? What is this showing me? What is this inviting me into exploring deeper into my own world? So yeah, I think I really just hope that the listeners today, if you take anything away, let it be that instead of projecting and questioning, go inwards and start doing the reflection of why am I calling this in? Why is this a frequency that I'm in right now? Where can I clear some more blocks within me to make sure that I'm vibrating at that frequency of being my most authentic self and being fully embodied in my whole self, and calling in an equal energy match to that.
You said that beautifully. Yep, that's exactly how it works. And so eliminating, right? I mean, to say that even more specifically, if there is a victim consciousness that you're operating from whatsoever, you need to eliminate the victim consciousness. All it sounds like the work that you do and the work that I certainly do with people is about, personal responsibility, like identifying where it is that you're feeling, blaming someone outside of you, or that victim consciousness exists anywhere in you, which might be really valid and legitimate, right? Because we've had these experiences that have informed us feeling that way. And it is our responsibility to identify where that's showing up and move beyond that, right? To take just full ownership of our own experience. And that's a perspective that if you don't really master that perspective and that mindset inside yourself, then, like everything, you can't essentially create what you want to create. You can't have this conscious partnership. You won't find it, and it will feel elusive to you, and it will feel like, which will reinforce the victimhood. And so it's just really taking full ownership of your perspective and, whatever you believe is true. And so noticing where those beliefs might be kind of erroneous, and you can show up and do approach it more consciously, you can have anything you want in your life.
Yeah. Wow. So beautifully said. And I could not agree more. I love that you dove into that victim consciousness, because that's literally what it all is. I believe that the work that we do is all about how can we create that space between our ego and our higher self. The ego is like, usually the one that's protecting us from the external world, and sitting in victim consciousness of being like, no, like, that separation. And then the higher self is always the one that is seeing the higher truth, the higher perspective of what's going on, so that it can learn and grow. And that's like the spirit, the soul is here to learn and grow. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that.
And it really won't be stopped, right? Like your soul really wants to express in that way. And so that drive that's coming from within is so important to really honor that, because that is what is, this kind of wise part of us I mean, that's what its purpose is, and that's what it's trying to do. And so not to stifle that, but to really allow and be supportive in that process, right, of your soul being kind of enlightened in that way, I think is the best gift that we can give ourselves, to the world, to our partners, to anyone, right?
Completely agreed. So what is the work that you do, and how can my audience find you and connect with you if they wanted to dive into working with you?
Yeah. Well, so I have a spiritual psychology practice, which is why I say clinically trained, mystically guided. So I work pretty intuitively as well. And I do a lot of like consciousness coaching with people. A lot of it can be energy work. It all looks different because I'm always like, again, individuating, tuning into your energy, what you need, what your blocks might be, where they come from. It's always good to kind of have a conscious understanding of what that is and what's informed where we are, but not getting stuck there, right? We don't want to overanalyze everything. We want to move into the embodiment of that. And so I work with people and just, meet each soul or each couple or whomever it is that I'm working with. And I help them figure out what, unique kind of Tootsie Roll of work we can provide that does come, right? I mean, it's kind of clinically grounded, right, in this psychology framework, and it goes way beyond that because I'm using my intuition and intuitively working to help you remove, and energetically, right, to remove whatever those blocks are. So that can be kind of shamanic type journeys or all of that. So it's no two sessions
Amazing.
are been alike. Yeah, we kind of tune in, and I love to work in that real quantum way where we can shift things pretty quickly and in cool ways that might be unlike any other therapy experience you've had. But it's kind of like when you've tried everything else and you're like, oh, I really want to have a different experience, and this is maybe how I could integrate having all of that. And so that's how I work with people, and people can find me. The name of my practice is Shrink Bigger. And so my website is shrinkbigger.com, or my Instagram. I'm trying to get a YouTube page going too. So people can, just check there, go onto my website too, and you can get free content, things like this. I'll send out newsletters of podcasts and interviews and things like that I do. And then there's free meditations and things if you just want a free sampling, which is always really beautiful too. But, I always say, trust your intuition. If it feels aligned, to reach out and see if it might be a good fit, then happy to help people.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Where does Shrink Bigger come from? The name?
Well, it just kind of dropped in. It was totally intuitive. So my practice had been going for a couple of years, and it's really kind of like a play on words, right? So a double entendre of like, instead of shrinking, right, which we typically think of in as in this psychology field, and the way that I think psychology can be limited, it's like, well, we're really shrinking something down. It's really saying like, hey, well, what if we were to use this psychology clinical training, right, to expand you and make you bigger? So to me, it's just this play on words that came to me years ago, and I thought, yeah, that's who I am. That's what I do.
I love that so much. It's amazing. And I love what you said about like just the fullness of the human experience, including the mind, body, soul, the energy inwards, right? The way I see your practice is like when you're sick and tired of the Band-Aid solutions and you want a real sustainable way to shift from the inside out, and one that is going to last, not just be something that you fix here and there just for it to come back in 10 years and hit you back in the head. Like, yeah. So I love the work that you do.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. It was such an honor talking with you today and sharing your wisdom with my audience.
Likewise. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to be in your beautiful energy.